Close encounters of the second kind are very similar to close encounters of the first kind, a sighting of a UFO within 500 feet, except, in this case, the UFO causes a physical effect on the environment or the witnesses. Dr. Gary Nolan is a professor of pathology at Stanford University and has published over 300 research articles. Dr. Nolan was reached out to by the CIA and aerospace companies who had a job for him. He has spent the last decade studying, quote, anomalous materials recovered from UFOs with others like Jacques Vallée, computer scientist who helped create the precursor to the internet and UFO researcher and author who assisted Dr. J. Allen Hynek in his work with the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book. Dr. Nolan and Vallée have even published a study on these anomalous metals dropped by UFOs. Dr. Nolan has also done brain MRIs of close encounter witnesses. Some of these witnesses are fighter pilots who got too close to UFOs and were found to have serious brain damage. Some of these effects are similar to Havana syndrome, a mysterious medical symptom of uncertain cause afflicting U.S. and Canadian government officials. The cause is uncertain, but it is believed to be caused by pulsed radio energy, perhaps directed energy microwave weapons. Symptoms range from dizziness, ringing in the ears, to brain injuries. He was also told that some of these witnesses have already died from their condition. When asked if he could describe the more abnormal effects on the brains observed with MRIs, Nolan said, "If you've ever looked at an MRI of somebody with multiple sclerosis, there's something called white matter disease. It's scarring. It's a big white blob or multiple white blobs scattered throughout the MRI. It's essentially dead tissue where the immune system has attacked the brain." Dr. Nolan told Motherboard that he had approximately 100 patients, and most were defense or governmental personnel or people working in the aerospace industry. Dr. Nolan's findings are consistent with documents originally compiled by MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and held by AATIP, again one of the Pentagon's UFO programs. These physiological effects were compiled from close encounters spanning from 1873 to 1994, covering nearly 400 close encounters. The list of side effects from contact with UFOs include radiation burns, electromagnetic effects on vehicles, paralysis, brain damage, eye damage, etc. In an interview with GQ magazine, former director of AATIP, Lue Elizondo, was asked what kind of health effects and other phenomena pilots may suffer. Quote, "I've got to be careful. I can't speak too specifically, but one might imagine that you get a report from a pilot who says, 'Lou, it's really weird. I was flying and I got close to this thing and I came back home and it was like I got a sunburn. I was red for 4 days.' Well, that's a sign of radiation. That's not a sunburn, it's a radiation burn." Then, a pilot might say, if they gotten a little closer, "Lou, I'm at the hospital. I've got symptoms that are indicative of microwave damage, meaning internal injuries. Even in my brain, there's some morphology there." And then you might have somebody who gets really close and says, "You know, Lou, it's really bizarre. It felt like I was there for only 5 minutes, but when I looked at my watch, 30 minutes went by. But I only used 5 minutes worth of fuel. How is that possible?" Well, there's a reason for that, we believe, and it probably has to do with the warping of space-time. Among the strangest of the effects perceived are time loss, extrasensory perception, and medical exams, which we'll be discussing later on in the Iceberg. The Cash-Landrum incident.
Yes, sir. This is Vickie Landrum from Dayton, Texas.
Yes.
A deer come down and it was like fire was coming from it.
Uh-huh.
Right ahead of us, and we had to stop. And we got out of the car, which I didn't stay out for just a minute because I had my little grandson, which I got close to, and I got right in the car. There's nothing happened to me, but my eyes was burned. But the Betty Cash, it was with me.
December 29th, 1980, Betty Cash, Vickie Landrum, and Vickie's grandson were driving home after their dinner along an empty road in a dense forest when they saw a bright light among the trees. They guessed that it was just an airplane going to the local airport and dismissed it. A few minutes later, they saw the light again, but it was closer and brighter. The light came from a huge, diamond-shaped object over 100 feet away. It was expelling energy and lights like fire onto the road below. They immediately felt heat radiating off the object and stopped the car, reportedly fearing burning if they got any closer. Landrum believed that the UFO was a sign of the second coming of Jesus Christ, telling her grandson, "That's Jesus, he won't hurt us." The heat was strong enough to make the car's metal body painful to the touch. Cash said she had to use her coat to protect her hand from being burned by the door handle when she finally got back in the car. When she touched the dashboard, Landrum claimed that her hand pressed into the softened vinyl, leaving an imprint that was evident weeks later. As the object began to rise, many military helicopters appeared, swarming the object. Betty said, quote, "They seemed to rush in from all directions. It seemed like they were trying to encircle the thing. Within a few seconds, the UFO had disappeared behind the trees lining the road. That night, they reportedly all experienced similar symptoms, though Cash to a greater degree, since she got closest to the object. They claimed that they suffered from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, generalized weakness, a burning sensation in their eyes, and similar symptoms to sunburns. Over the next few days, Cash claimed that her symptoms worsened, with painful blisters forming on her skin. On January 3, 1981, Cash was taken to a hospital emergency room. It said that she could not walk, had lost large patches of skin and clumps of hair. She was released after 12 days, though her condition had not improved much, and she later returned to the hospital for another 15 days. In the 1985 HBO documentary, UFOs, What's Going On?, Cash claimed that she was treated for cancer after being exposed to the radioactive UFO. The Landrums' health was somewhat better, though reportedly both suffered from lingering weakness, skin sores, and hair loss. The witnesses have been accused of exaggerating and faking their side effects, but their illness itself cannot be denied. Cash later developed breast cancer, and Landrum severe cataracts. None of the witnesses thought the UFO was extraterrestrial. Cash and Landrum thought the craft was a secret U.S. government project, as indicated by the military helicopters following the object. Cash and Landrum attempted to sue the U.S. government for $20 million, but they lost the case, with the U.S. government stating that it could not be proven that they had anything to do with the craft. September 19, 1976. A luminous object was reported above Tehran by multiple witnesses. An F-4 Phantom with 2 military officers were dispatched to investigate the object. As they reached Tehran, nearing the object, the pilot lost all instruments and communications, so they returned to the base. A second F-4 Phantom was dispatched to investigate, acquired radar lock on an object at 50 kilometers. Its size was described as a Boeing Stratotanker. As he approached the light, the pilot described it as flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights, so bright that I was not able to see its body. The Phantom then lost its communications, and the pilot tried to fire an infrared guided missile, but it too was shut down until the jet moved away from the object. The pilot stated he was startled by a round object which came out of the primary object and started coming straight toward me at a high rate of speed, almost as if it were a missile. But as he attempted to fire, the weapons control panel went out and he lost all instruments and the radio. A nearby jet airliner also suffered radio failure. When he could report to the control tower, he was told to get back. On his way, he looked to his left and saw a smaller object come out of the main object and fly into the ground. The pilot expected an explosion, but instead the object slowed down and landed gently on the ground, radiating a bright light. The next day, the same 2 officers flew in a helicopter to look at where they thought the light hit the ground. The Vandenberg UFO incident. There have been numerous instances of UFOs interfering with nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. Over 160 ex-United States Air Force members have come forward to share their experiences with UFOs interfering with atomic weapons. One of these men is ex-U.S. Air Force First Lieutenant Dr. Robert Jacobs. September 14, 1964, Jacobs was dispatched to the Vandenberg Air Force Base to record all 3 stages of an Atlas rocket's flight. The rocket's flight ended with the separation of a dummy warhead at the edge of space. The next day, he was ordered into his superior's office and was met by men from the CIA. Major Mansman played the footage of the launch, which revealed that a disc-shaped object fired multiple beams of light at the dummy warhead, disabling it. I go into much more depth on this topic on my video, UFOs Shut Down Nukes. 1954 Florence UFO Incident. This case took place October 27th, 1954. 10,000 people attending a soccer match, witnessed multiple cigar-shaped UFOs fly over the stadium at high speeds and then instantly stop. It was so surreal that the stadium was silenced. One of the spectators stated, "I remember clearly seeing this incredible sight. They were moving very fast and then they just stopped. It all lasted a couple of minutes. I would like to describe them as being like Cuban cigars. They just reminded me of Cuban cigars in the way they looked." Ardico Magnini, one of the players that day, stated, "While we were playing the match, everything came to a stop because everybody was looking up at the sky intensely. We were astonished. We had never seen anything like it before. We were absolutely shocked from the moment we saw it. It was something that looked like an egg that was moving slowly. Everyone was looking up, and there was also some glitter coming down from the sky, silver glitter. Afterwards, a thin, wiry substance was found covering the surrounding area, even the forest. In this case, despite appearing before roughly 10,000 witnesses, the UFO was explained as a misidentified meteor shower, or migrations of spiders using their webs as sails, with the light passing through the spider silk, creating the optical illusion of a cigar-shaped object. The substance found surrounding the area was prejudged by prominent UFO skeptic Philip J. Klass to be the spider silk used for the migration. Again, as there were roughly 10,000 witnesses, this mass encounter was well reported at the time. A journalist at the local newspaper La Nazione, Giorgio Battini, received hundreds of phone calls about the sightings from concerned citizens. From his office, the view of the sky was obstructed by a cathedral, so he went to the top of the newspaper building, where he witnessed, quote, shiny balls moving fast toward the dome of the cathedral. He then ventured out to investigate. He came across the strange substance covering a nearby forest. He rolled up several samples on a matchstick and brought them to the Institute of Chemical Analysis at the University of Florence, and was surprised to find that others had already done the same. This kind of discovery is not unheard of after a close encounter. This elusive substance, called angel hair, has been found at the sites of many UFO encounters, but usually disintegrates after a few hours or sometimes after being touched. Angel hair was studied by Dr. J. Allen Hynek under Project Blue Book. He stated that in several of the angel hair cases, quote, the composition or origin of the angel hair is uncertain, and defined angel hair as a fibrous material which falls in large quantities but is unstable and disintegrates and vanishes soon after falling. However, unlike most cases, in this instance multiple samples were taken and analyzed in the University of Florence. Professor Giovanni Caneri, who analyzed the material, stated, "It's a fibrous material which is highly resistant to tension and torsion. Once subjected to heat action, the material grows dark and evaporates, leaving transparent sediment that melts away. The sediment was found to contain boron, silicon, and magnesium. Hypothetically speaking, the substance may be some kind of boron-silicon glass. He also found that the material was not radioactive. The spectrographic analysis debunks the spider migration theory, as spider silk is made of protein. Beyond that, there were no real answers, and the angel hair was destroyed in the process of analysis."
Coyne helicopter encounter. October 18th, 1973. An Army Reserve helicopter with a crew of 4 men took off from Columbus, Ohio, heading to Cleveland. Along the way, one of the men spotted a red light on the horizon, which turned and flew towards the helicopter at an astounding speed. The pilot, Lawrence Coyne, stated, "The light was traveling in excess of 600 knots. It came from the horizon to our aircraft in about 10 seconds. We were on a collision course." Coyne had to force the helicopter into a dive at 500 feet per minute in an attempt to avoid the object. They attempted to contact the National Guard to check if it was one of their aircrafts, but after initial contact, all transmissions were lost. Coyne increased the descent from 500 feet per minute to 2,000 feet per minute, but still he could not avoid the approaching object. Just as the crew braced for impact, the light halted and began hovering above and in front of the helicopter. At 1,700 feet,
I braced myself for the impact with the other craft. It was coming from our right. I was scared. There had been so little time to respond. The thing was terrifically fast. We looked up and saw it stopped right over us. It had a big gray metallic-looking hull about 60 feet long. It was shaped like an airfoil or a streamlined fat cigar. There was a red light on the front. The leading edge glowed red a short distance back from the nose. There was a center dome. A green light at the rear reflected on the hull. The object made no noise, but shined a light into the helicopter. The light appeared green to the two men in the back of the helicopter. Coyne said that as he and members of his crew stared at the craft, his helicopter began to climb without his guidance. I had made no attempt to pull up. There was no noise or turbulence either. All controls were set for a 20-degree dive, yet we had climbed from 1,700 to 3,500 feet with no power in a couple of seconds, with no G-forces or other noticeable strains. Shortly after, the UFO moved off to the west and was gone. All of the witnesses agreed that it moved faster than the 250-knot limit for aircraft below 10,000 feet. This encounter took place near a location that the Air National Guard kept a squadron of F-100 Super Sabres. Coyne personally checked and found that none of the unit's jets were in the air during the encounter. All members of the crew signed a disposition form detailing the near miss with the UFO. This case was even presented to the UN in 1978. Hynek and Vallée attended in person, and Coyne wrote a letter for the hearing. The best attempt at explaining this encounter is the theory that this was a plane that mistakenly attempted to refuel with Coyne's helicopter. This would explain the red and green lights seen by the crew. However, this does ignore the fact that no aircrafts were reported in the area, the object's ability to hover without making a sound, and the competency of the witnesses, as Coyne had 19 years of flight experience. This case is considered the most credible event of the 1973 UFO wave, otherwise known as the Year of the Humanoids. I plan on making a video about the Year of the Humanoids in the future. March 14th, 1966. Over 100 witnesses saw a football-shaped UFO maneuver over the University of Michigan, a swamp, and an airport for roughly 4 hours. At 3:50 a.m., Washtenaw County police officers would have multiple encounters with UFOs. Multiple officers witnessed disc-shaped crafts that performed impossible maneuvers and seemed to fly in formation, suggesting an intelligence. I'm going to read a few excerpts from the log of complaint number 00967, signed by Corporal Broderick and Deputy Patterson of the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. 3:50 a.m. Received calls from Deputies Bushrow and Foster, Car 19, stating that they saw some suspicious objects in the sky. Disc, star-like colors, red and green, moving very fast, making sharp turns, having left-to-right movements, going in a northwest direction. 4:04 a.m. Livingston County Sheriff's Department called and stated that they also saw the objects and were sending cars to the location. 4:05 a.m. Ypsilanti Police Department also called, stated that the object was seen at the location of US 12 and I-94. 4:10 a.m. Monroe County Sheriff's Department called and stated that they also saw the objects. 4:20 a.m. Car 19 stated that they just saw 4 more in the same location, moving at a high rate of speed. 4:54 a.m. Car 19 called and stated that 2 more were spotted coming from the southeast over Monroe County, also that they were side by side. 4:56 a.m. Monroe County Sheriff's Department stated that they just spotted the object, and also that they are having calls from citizens, called Selfridge Air Force Base, and they stated that they also had some objects, presumably on radar, over Lake Erie, and were unable to get any ID from the objects. Deputies Bushrow and J. Foster stated, "This is the strangest thing that we have ever witnessed. We would have not believed this story if we hadn't seen it with our own eyes. These objects could move at fantastic speeds and could make very sharp turns, dive and climb, and hover with great maneuverability. We have no idea what these objects were or where they could have come from." At 4:20 a.m., there were 4 of these objects flying in a line formation in a northwesterly direction. At 5:30, these objects were out of view and were not seen again. 3 days later, more police officers would witness 3 or 4 red, white, and green circular or top-shaped objects oscillating and glowing. In an attempt to identify these UFOs, they called a local airport, but the airport radars detected no objects in the area. In a report to NICAP, the officers stated that the 2 objects were operating together, circling and flying in formation, while a third object hovered at a lower altitude. March 20th, police officers attempted to pursue the same glowing and oscillating UFOs, but they failed. Livingston and Monroe County residents also reported seeing the same objects. The same day, on Frank Manor's farm, the owner's 6 dogs began barking rapidly. Frank Manor and his son went out to see that the dogs were barking at strange lights floating over the swamp. Dozens of others would also see the strange domed craft. It was described as having a scaled or coral-like surface and alternating flashing lights on each end. Frank would later state, "We got to about 500 yards of the thing. It was sort of shaped like a pyramid, with a blue-green light on the right-hand side, and on the left, a white light. The body was like a yellowish coral rock, and looked like it had holes in it, sort of like if you took a piece of cardboard box and split it open. You couldn't see it too good because it was surrounded with heat waves like you see in the desert. The white light turned to a blood red as we got close to it." From a knoll on Frank Manor's home, Robert Taylor, Dexter police chief, was able to use his binoculars to watch the object in the field. He described it as a pulsating red, glowing object, and he saw a light on each end of the object. The landing site was marked by indentations in the ground where the UFO once stood. Slightly above average radiation readings were found, and allegedly all microscopic life in the water was dead, as if sterilized. Like many others, Frank would come to regret telling the public of his UFO encounter because of the harassment that would ensue, largely as a product of a long propaganda and disinformation campaign.
Are you sorry now that you did tell people what you saw?
Yes, I am. I am sorry because not that it's not the truth, but it's just the idea, the reaction of the people. They think you're a nut. Tell you the truth, that's just what they figure you are, and I'm not going to take it no more. I don't want nobody down in here. I just leave me alone. And if the thing lands right there by that pump, I'd never say a word. Then he got out and talked to me. I wouldn't tell nobody. That's just the way I feel. I'm bitter and disgusted in the whole matter. And if people's going to act like that, I hope one lands right in Ann Arbor, right in the middle of Detroit.
40 miles away, at Hillsdale College, dozens of witnesses saw UFOs flying over the trees.
Well, when I was looking out the window with the binoculars, I guess it was about 12, I saw it, and I saw 2 red lights, and I saw what looked to be shaped like a pie. I could just see the front of it, and I just saw the round front, and I could see the lights on either side. And then the red light was sort of casting a glow over the whole thing, so it looked like a round disc.
At first, when I'd heard the other girls talk about it, I believed them, yet I couldn't really make myself comprehend it because I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But then when I saw it, I just was fascinated. I wasn't afraid. I just wanted to stay there and keep my eyes glued to it. I couldn't leave.
As the sightings continued, Dr. J. Allen Hynek was brought in to investigate. As I've said before, Dr. Hynek was pressured by the United States Air Force to dismiss UFO sightings and provide a prosaic explanation, no matter what the encounter entailed. In this case, the Air Force wanted Hynek to find a mundane explanation in order to calm the public. Hynek investigated this case for barely 3 hours before publicly dismissing the sightings as marsh gas.
The Air Force sent its chief scientific consultant on UFOs, Professor J. Allen Hynek, to check the Michigan sightings. Dr. Hynek agreed that the good citizens of Michigan had seen something in the marshlands. He thought they had seen marsh gas.
I've had many, many letters pointing out that they, as children on the farm, had many experiences with swamp lights, and that this was obviously the thing that it was, and they couldn't understand why the people in Michigan got so excited over swamp lights. And the illusion of motion frequently is given by the fact that a little bit of swamp light appears here, it goes out, another one appears over here, that goes out, but the illusion as viewed from a distance is that the objects will move back and forth. And sometimes the gas will gather into a ball and actually float.
The vast majority of people did not believe Hynek's explanation, as it did not account for Frank Manner's sighting or many other aspects of the case, and so Hynek became a media laughingstock. The silver lining to this part of the conspiracy to cover up UFOs is that it finally pushed Hynek over the edge. In an interview, Hynek was asked, was there ever any direct pressure applied by the Air Force itself for you to come up with a conventional explanation to these phenomena? There was an implied pressure, yes, very definitely. What began to change your own perception of the phenomena? Two things, really. One was the completely negative and unyielding attitude of the Air Force. They wouldn't give UFOs the chance of existing, even if they were flying up and down the street in broad daylight. Everything had to have an explanation. I began to resent that, even though I basically felt the same way, because I still thought that they weren't going about it in the right way. You can't assume that everything is black no matter what. Secondly, the caliber of the witnesses began to trouble me. Quite a few instances were reported by military pilots, for example, and I know them to be fairly well trained, so this is when I first began to think that, well, maybe there is something to all this. The famous swamp gas case, which came later on, finally pushed me over the edge. From that point on, I began to look at reports from a different angle, which was to say that some of them could be true UFOs. This is what would later drive him to found the Center for UFO Studies after Project Blue Book ended, as Hynek was not satisfied with the way that the Air Force dismissed UFOs outright. November 2nd, 1971, in Delphos, Kansas, 16-year-old Ronald Johnson and his dog were outside on his family's farm when he was called to dinner by his mother. He told her that he would be right there, but then he heard a loud rumbling sound that he would later compare to a washing machine. 75 feet away, floating only a few feet above the ground, was a mushroom-shaped object shining with multicolored lights. He estimated that it was 6 to 8 feet in diameter. Ronald would later state that the light was emitted from the entire craft, but that the light was brightest on the bottom. It slowly crept closer to the farm, illuminating the ground below. Ron watched the UFO for what felt like 5 minutes. As Ron stood before the UFO, he was paralyzed. YouTuber Incredible History interviewed Ron, and he specifies that he was paralyzed not by fear, but by the UFO itself.
So you don't think you were frozen out of fear? Something was causing you to not be able to physically move?
Right, right. It wasn't fear. I was scared, but when I can see the sheep couldn't move, the dog was right by me, and and I know he was left, and I know the sheep, after it took off, they jumped the fence.
Eventually, the light became too bright and began to burn Ron's eyes. Klieg conjunctivitis is a well-known side effect of prolonged exposure to ultraviolet light, and is also known as a side effect of some close encounters. Soon after, the UFO would shoot into the sky at high speed. Ron was blinded by the light, and then disoriented by the return of the darkness of night. He managed to reach his parents and told them of his encounter. They came outside, and together, all three briefly saw the UFO hovering in the night sky. According to the witnesses, the UFO began to glow similarly to a welder's arc before vanishing. There would also be another witness to corroborate the Johnson family's sighting. Mr. Lester Ensbarger would also call the local police department to report a bright light descending in the sky in the Delphos area at approximately 7:30. The family investigated the site where Ron first saw the UFO, hovering close to the ground. Some of the trees had become discolored. Ron believed that some of the dead branches were broken by the UFO, but even stranger, a glowing material was found on some of the trees and in the surrounding area. They discovered a ring of the glowing material in the soil where the UFO hovered. A picture of the ring was taken within 10 minutes of the encounter. Ron's mother touched the glowing soil and soon began to suffer from numbness in her fingers. The next morning, the family told their story to the police and the local newspaper. Reporter Thadia Smith, along with more of the Johnson family, came to see the ring. The report states, "The circle was still very distinct and plain to see. The soil was dried and crusted. The circle or ring was approximately 8 feet across. The center of the ring and the outside area were still muddy from recent rains. The area of the ring that was dried was about a foot across and was very light in color. The object had crushed a dead tree to the ground when it landed or took off, and from appearance, had broken a limb of a live tree when it landed. The broken limb was most unusual. It would snap and break as though it had been dead for quite some time. Yet it was green under the bark, and the upper area still had green leaves clinging to its branches. However, the lower area looked as though it had been blistered and had a whitish cast. Further experimentation showed the ground under the ring to be dry to a depth of 1 foot. There have been at least 5 analyses on this soil. None have proven the Johnsons to be fraudsters. The links can be found in the description, and you should read them. They're very interesting, but also inconclusive. There is another important element to this case, which is found in many UFO encounters. Though Ron did not know this initially, 30 minutes passed from when Ron's mother called him to dinner to when he returned to tell them of the UFO. His parents had enough time to finish their dinner. However, Ron has no recollection of this time and cannot account for it. To him, it was only a few minutes. Ron's experience of what is known as missing time is frighteningly common among witnesses to UFOs. March 8th, 1994. One of the largest mass sightings of UFOs took place over Lake Michigan. There were 300 calls to 911. The probability of someone seeing a UFO is already incredibly low, with the added stigma surrounding UFOs stopping many witnesses from daring to come forward. For 300 witnesses to be our minimum, this was definitely something extraordinary. At roughly 9:30, 14-year-old Joey Graves and his sister Michelle were in their living room watching TV when the room was suddenly flooded with a bright light pouring in through the window. They looked out the window to see 5 bright red, blue, white, green, and yellow lights moving in a circular formation, or rotating. The children began to scream and quickly went to tell their parents, who had also come to see the UFOs. The children's mother, Holly Graves, quickly called 911. Holly Graves would be one of the first to call 911, as hundreds would bear witness to the UFOs that night.
911. We were just wondering, have you heard anything about these lights that are flickering up here in what is it, the east-southeast area? It's like a group. It looks like a string of Christmas lights that's way up in the sky. And we wondered if you had heard anything about it.
Not a thing.
Wow, you might not have somebody take a look. It's different. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know. It's strange. But it's right out east-southeast. It's way up. And it's just like a circle of a lot of different lights flickering. And it's different than any airplane.
The full audio of Holly Graves' 911 call can be found in the description, along with more 911 calls and transcripts. After calling 911, Holly and her husband Daryl went outside to get a better look at the UFO. They were able to see the body of the rounded craft, which appeared to be chrome or some type of polished metal. The object moved slowly and silently at 300 feet in the air, as the lights continued to move in a circle. The couple would watch the UFO for roughly 15 minutes before Officer Velthouse arrived to respond to the 911 call. Officer Velthouse and Daryl watched 2 UFOs shining with bright lights for roughly 10 minutes before one of the lights departed at high speeds, unlike any conventional aircraft could have. Officer Velthouse attempted to pursue the UFO in his patrol car, while Daryl continued to watch the stationary UFO. His wife heard him scream when the UFO divided into 5 separate crafts before quickly vanishing. As Velthouse tried and failed to pursue the UFO, more and more calls about the UFOs began to come in. The Ottawa County 911 dispatch contacted the Muskegon National Weather Service station to see if anything was detected on their radar. The following are excerpts from radar operator Jack Bashong's conversation with the Ottawa County 911 dispatch.
Now I'm getting multiple returns. One of the people that called that I had happened to talk to said it looked like a bunch of cylindrical objects. Well, oh my God, what is that? They were going together and coming apart. Yeah, there's 3, and they're lengthwise. Now I'm getting 3 of them. An officer in the Holland City just sent me a
3 to 4 of them.
I'm seeing three, and they're separated by, they look like a triangle on my scope. I'm seeing 3 of those. They're very strong. Now I'm getting another one down in Berrien County. These are huge returns. I've never seen anything like this. Not even when I'm doing storms. These aren't storms. They're just popping up all over the place.
This is strange, yeah, because the officer says it's green and red lights. It does not look like an airplane. Okay. They come together and then they separate, and they just keep doing this all the time.
And you're seeing that? Yeah, I'm seeing 3 returns. They've moved positions now. These are bigger than planes. Usually a plane will pick up as a little pinpoint, but these are about, on my radar scope, these are about the size of maybe, looks like a half centimeter across.
Again, the full audio can be found in the description. To reiterate the main points of the call, the UFOs were first detected at 6,000 feet, traveling at 100 miles per hour. They appeared on radar as very large returns, larger than any plane. At least one police officer was able to visually confirm the radar data, as were many other witnesses who were calling 911. The 3 objects were traveling in a triangular formation. The height of the objects ruled out precipitation or other weather phenomena. These radar returns were very strong and spiking, indicating solid objects. Jack Bashong would later state the objects were smooth, very reflective, likely some sort of polished metal, as evidenced by the high-energy echo returns. The objects seemed to move one at a time, following one another and maintaining their triangular formation. They would occasionally rise thousands of feet in seconds. Once the 3 objects reached southern Lake Michigan, they stopped and began to hover. Jack watched the objects for 2 to 3 hours on radar. Dozens of other objects would also appear on radar, joining the other 3 UFOs. These UFOs were detected on radar performing impossible feats, like ascending from 4,000 feet to 55,000 feet in seconds, similar to feats performed by the Tic Tac UFO encountered by the United States Navy in 2004. At one point, the radar detected the UFOs moving 20 miles in under a second, which would be 72,000 miles per hour. Obviously, this vastly outperforms any conventional aircraft. A couple who had a vantage point over Lake Michigan would also witness the UFOs as Jack Bashong detected them at 6,000 feet in the air. From their position, they saw what seemed to be some sort of waterfall leading to one of the UFOs, as if the UFO was depositing or perhaps absorbing water from Lake Michigan. The couple who witnessed this waterfall coming from the UFO were so frightened that they abandoned their campsite, leaving behind many of their belongings. It's definitely worth noting that many UFO sightings occur near large bodies of water, and the Great Lakes are the largest source of fresh water on planet Earth. The unidentified flying objects in this case were compared to Christmas lights or wreaths by many witnesses. The same comparison was made by World War II era pilots who witnessed the Foo Fighters or Kraut fireballs. UFOs seemingly absorbing or depositing water is also not unheard of in the close encounter literature. If you've come this far, I'd like to seriously thank you for watching. Please share and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Until next time.